We decided we would be speaking tonight about Hanukkah. I guess tonight and next week are the last two shiurim we have before Hanukkah. So we have a fascinating discussion in the Gemara itself regarding an interesting intersection between halacha and hashqafah. That is this perhaps famous, perhaps not yet so famous machloket between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel as to how we light the candles on Hanukkah. So everyone acknowledges, everyone admits.
So the direction, left to right or right to left?
No, left to right, left is, I think we pretty standardly agree that we arrange the candles right to left.
I'm sorry, if you increase or decrease, right?
Correct.
Increment or decrement?
How many candles do we light on the first night versus the 8th night? What happens in the meantime? So famously, Bet Shammai sponsors the opinion of going from 8 candles down to 1. Right? By the way, I should say parenthetically, everyone acknowledges that if you only lit 1 candle, you fulfilled your obligation. So even this entire machloket is really only on the topic of the what's called la mehadrin. When you're lighting in the ideal, fancy, let's say more embellished way, then you would want not just 1 candle per night, because the original taqana was this. The original decree, edict, if you will, was that every Jewish household has 1 candle lit on each night of Hanukkah. Period. 8 days. I light 1 candle every day. How much does Hanukkah cost? 8 times 1 is 8. 8 candles I have to light during half an hour, and we're good. The shita that holds lam hadrin. This is, by the way, you should know, and I say this also an interesting parenthetical detour. You can count probably on one hand the number of times that the term mehadrin appears in the Shas. Today, everything that we buy, like milk, water, salt, kasher, lam hadrin, min ha-mehadrin. So the only time in the entire Talmud that the expression lam hadrin, min ha-mehadrin appears is actually by Hanukkah. Very interesting. If we have time, we'll get back to this a little bit later. What exactly does this mean? So we have the simple, basic, standard, let's say, rabbanut. Performance of the mitzvah is I light a candle every night. On the 8th night, I find out I'm broke, dirt poor, didn't sell much meat this week. So I have enough olive oil to last me for 30 minutes. I'm going to light 1 candle. I'm going to make a bracha. Make 2 brachot. I light the candle. I fulfilled my obligation. No complaints, no arguments, no discussions. We'll talk about this in halakha in about 30, 40 minutes. When it comes to the fancification, the beautification of the mitzvah, how do I do the mitzvah in such a way that it does more than just fulfill my obligation to light 1 candle per night? Here is where you have a machloket, Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel. Everyone agrees, you lit 1 candle, you fulfilled your obligation. No fight, we're still friends. If you want to do the mitzvah in a fancier way, how do you go about doing it? According to Bet Shammai, you want to be mahadir, you want to be a fancifier, a beautifier, a glorifier of the mitzvah. You're going to start with 8 candles on the first night, and you remove 1 each day. According to Bet Hillel, you're going to start with 1 candle, you're going to add up to 8 by the last night of Hanukkah. So this is the opinion that we follow, so it's easy to clap hands for Bet Hillel. What's going on with Bet Shammai? Why is there a machloket in the first place, and what exactly is going on here behind the scenes? So, Bet Shammai actually makes an interesting comparison. If you're familiar with Sukkot, on Sukkot, unfortunately, we don't have the korbanot, we don't have the sacrifices today. But had we Bet HaMikdash intact, and if we had the Mizbeach fully functional, and Kohanim who could somehow establish their genealogy, we would be sacrificing on Sukkot these parim, these bulls, as the korban musaf of Chag Sukkot. So maybe not a happy time to be a male cow, but for the entire Jewish nation, we're bringing extra korbanot that we normally don't bring. Cows, they are a process. I go through this on a daily basis. Taking apart a bull or a cow is an awful lot of work. So, the first day of Sukkot, we bring a musaf of 13 bulls, no less. Second day, we go down to 12. 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. So, all told, 7 days of Sukkot. 7, here in Chutz La'aretz we do Yom Tov Sheni, but really it's only 7 days of Sukkot, over the course of which the average number of bulls sacrificed per day is 10. So we get 70 bulls all told. That is an awful lot of work. 70 bulls in Bet HaMikdash. The Mishnah says they used to do, really divide this up into 24 kohanim per bull. Take it apart, to skin it, to pull the guts and
imagine you have those guys at the warehouse.
So, Yes. If only they made Kohanim like they used to. Rav Giat in Israel actually makes the case that every Kohen should learn in Chod Shechita because they have to know how to bring Korbanot. Come time for Beit HaMikdash, they're still going to be unemployed until they learn how to do Shechita. So what are they going to do? Clean the floors? Okay, we'll find jobs for people too. So, Beit Shammai says, simple, start with Sukkot. What's the deal with Sukkot? The Torah doesn't tell you why we go from 13, 12, 11, 10 to 7. And then on Shmini Atzeret we bring one bowl for this particular day, which is not, kind of isn't a part of the Chag. But we have a progression in regression. We go from one day to the next with one bull less per day. Says the Midrash, it's a beautiful discussion, theological, philosophical discussion. To what can you compare this? You can compare this to a king who meets a very dear friend of his. He hasn't seen him in, let's say, about a year. So they get together and they decide, you know what? I haven't seen you in so long. Let's throw a party. It's time we let our hair down, have a good time. We'll eat, we'll drink, we'll celebrate. Why not? So the first day, they're celebrating, they're ecstatic. It's been so long, we have to catch up. What have you been up to? I've gotten married, who's had kids, got divorced, who's moving on, who died, who was born. All these bits and pieces of news and information. They didn't have Facebook, so the Chagim was how they caught up. Regalim, everybody met in Yerushalayim. I can only imagine people shared bits and pieces of information one or the other. The second day, they're still super excited. I mean, they didn't catch up on everything. It doesn't have the same excitement as the first day, but they're still in the process of catching up. Day number 3, day number 4, day number 5, it's fun, it's exciting. Not exactly the same thing. And then you have the last day, the 7th day of the celebration, which is a little bit lighter on partying than the previous 6 were. And then Shemini Atzeret, it says the Midrash, this is where HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to us, so to speak, in the parable, Kasha alai paredatech. Up until now, the first day that I saw you, I was ecstatic. The second day, third day, I was happy. Now I'm content plus, but not as ecstatic as I otherwise might be. And all of a sudden, Shemini Atzeret is Yom Tov. It's not even Chol HaMoed anymore. Sukkot only has 1 day of Yom Tov, 6 days of Chol HaMoed, and then Shemini Atzeret is a whole other day. Why this whole other day? Because it's one thing that you see someone you haven't seen in a long time and you're excited. So the Kedusha is tremendous if we to compare this to our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shemini Atzeret, where the king, so to speak, says, I'm going to miss you now. This is the last day that I have with you. It's not so much that we have to catch up on what happened up until now. This is just a little sending off party because I'm not going to see you for a while. Why? Because we don't have any biblical holidays between Sukkot and Pesach. This is the dark side of the Hebrew calendar. We don't have any Yamim Tovim. We have Pesach, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot plus Shemini Atzeret all happen within 7 months, and these are the 5 months of the year that don't have any biblical holidays associated with them. So Shemini Atzeret is the party after the party. The excitement of Shemini Atzeret is not so much what happened up until now, because that party kind of fizzled out. It's the excitement or the emotion that gets aroused when you realize, true, we've been together for about 7 days, but now all of a sudden I realize, it's like being on vacation. Wow, tomorrow I'm going back to work. Let me do something nuts today. Let's just go out and have a wild time, because when I go back to work, I go back to work. So we have an extra holiday. Really, it's only one Qurban that we're bringing, but at the same time, it's a Yom Tov compared to the previous days of Chol HaMoed. Why is this? This is because the emotion is different. It's not the emotion of haven't seen you in a long time, miss you, love you, let's be in touch. This is the emotion of I like you a lot, I enjoy your company, I enjoy your presence. I wish this could go on forever, but it can't. So a little extra, something to take home, so to speak, a little kedusha we can absorb beyond this. So, according to the opinion of Beit Shammai, just like you have on Sukkot this impression that the kedusha diminishes, maybe. I mean, it's still holy, special days. Obviously, the things we do, things we don't do. Chol HaMoed has some interdictions associated with it. It's not Yom Tov, but the number of bulls that we bring is reduced by 1 every day. So apparently, there is some kind of a difference that has to signify something. There's a reason for it. So too, Hanukkah, it's special, it's happy, it's holy. and we go down from 8 to 1 in order to reflect the same concept. In yet another support of this decision, of the opinion, I have to be fair, the Bet Yosef brings 3 or 4 questions about this, the 8 days that we celebrate on Hanukkah. So, why is it that we celebrate 8 days when, and no offense to anybody, the first day that we found this oil, right?
It's not really
we lit it. So, what was miraculous about this? If we had enough oil to last us 1 day, so really the other 7 days were miraculous, and this first day was nice, special. I guess there was something neat to finding the oil, but it wasn't quite as miraculous. So one of the explanations that he brings, I believe he brings 4 of them. One of the explanations that he brings is, well, it was miraculous that they found the oil to begin with. They may not have had any. Another opinion holds that the fact that the oil didn't burn as it naturally might have. So it's one thing you found 1 extra container of oil, but if nature were left to its own devices, the oil would have burned out in 1 day, and I'd be back in the same situation the following day, nachs, until I found an extra thing of oil, and now it burned out, and I have none. So 1 day would have been fun, the other 6 or 7 days would have been somewhat upsetting. Maybe one explanation is to celebrate the 7 miraculous days and the fact that we defeated the Greeks in war. Maybe we can look at it that way as well. So it almost seems to imply that the further on we go, if we're excited over the military victory, maybe the spiritual victory, we're excited that the oil didn't burn as quickly as it otherwise might have, the subsequent days almost seem a little bit less special. By the time we got our act together and we started pressing more oil, a process that takes 7 days, so we didn't skip a beat. We didn't miss a day in which we were lighting the menorah, and that was fantastic. So the first day, it was the fact that we found the oil, so the first day is special. The military spiritual victory is special. The fact that it didn't burn out all at once is also special. And all those miracles happened in the beginning. Subsequent days are happy and special, but maybe a little bit less so, maybe progressively less so. So what is Beit Hillel suggesting, if that's the case? What do they bring to the table? What are they introducing by way of ideas if Beit Shammai seems to have some pretty compelling realities behind them? So we are ma'alin bi'kedusha ve'in moridin. We're going from one level of kedusha to the next. You can look at it this way and say the miracles were fantastic. What Hashem handed to us on Hanukkah was tremendous. At the same time, the work became progressively more challenging, more difficult. There was more for us to do. In other words, as if to say, we reflected more kedusha in rededicating Beit HaMikdash. The military victory was just the beginning, but winning back the souls, the fight against assimilation, etc. All this required a tremendous amount of effort on our part. So we are the ones adding kedusha. The miracle happened for us maybe on day 1. Yes, it's true that the oil didn't burn out and it lasted for another 7 days, but the reality is that was just the beginning. We had to get rid of the Greeks, we had to rededicate everything, we had to re-sanctify everything, we had to reestablish the control over the empire, control over the kingdom. And so we are ma'alim b'kodesh. We are adding on, we're increasing or augmenting, if you will, the degree of kedusha that's present. This is not atypical of the disputes, the discussions between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Very often we have this, the Maharami Prague talks about this as well, that Beit Shammai has this inclination, a tendency to look at things from the top down. Kedusha comes from Hashem. So Hashem performed miracles for us, gave us assistance, gave us help. And the Kedusha, as influenced upon us by Hashem, maybe diminished over time. So began with a powerful influence. We won the war. We rededicated Beit HaMikdash. We found the oil. It didn't burn out, etc. And the effect of that miracle kind of wore off over time. It dissipates over time. Beit Hillel has a tendency to look at things from the bottom up, street level. I mean, this is humanity where spiritual rubber meets the road. And their approach is typically, fine, but what do we bring to the picture? What did we influence? What did we initiate? What did we manage to accomplish? In those terms, our Kedusha, it seems, continued to grow. It began with this tremendous miracle. So Hashem gave us a push start. And once we got in gear, we started to move on our own. we got our identity back. We went back to reestablishing much of Torah Sheba'al Peh. We rededicated Beit HaMikdash. We actually dedicated these days as rabbinic holidays anyway on the calendar. It's not Yom Tov, but we say Hallel, we say Al Nisim in Birkat Hamazon, etc. So, interestingly enough, this process is probably more similar to Pesach than to anything else. Where we start this whole concept of Sefirat HaOmer. Interestingly enough, we're not counting on Sefirat HaOmer. We're not counting down as we typically do from Pesach to Shavuot. How many days are left? So if I'm waiting for day number 50, I can either count how many days have I passed, how many days do I have under my belt, so to speak, or I can count how many days do I have to run through and have to hurry through, and I'm waiting impatiently until Shavuot comes. So it's interesting how Beit Shammai starts with Sukkot, compares to Sukkot, and it seems like Beit Hillel is more on the Pesach side of things. There are many different directions we could take with this. I'll give you a perspective that Rav Ashkenazi would definitely sign off on, and that's the progression of Am Yisrael over time, over history. When the world was created, it was created with HaKadosh Baruch Hu basically inventing the world out of nothingness, inventing the world out of thin air. The divine influence on the world was probably the most powerfully felt in the reality of Gan Eden, physical or not. According to the Rambam, it seems it was not. And since then, there has been a progressive drop in the spiritual tension. Meaning, it's become increasingly difficult for people to do the right thing, increasingly difficult for us to receive prophecy, increasingly difficult for us to appreciate the culture and traditions of antiquity. In the terms of Hanukkah, it's become much easier for us to assimilate than it used to be. Maybe a little bit less anti-Semitism, less anti-Semitism today than it used to be. Maybe it's not as genocidal, but at the end of the day, the Goyim have successfully smothered more Jewish neshamot with love than they were able to with war. Now that there's less by way of active warfare, let's say, at least between us and the European culture, it's become more and more difficult for Jews to maintain their identity and to continue observing halacha. So that's a little bit of I don't want to say negative or depressing, but a Beit Shammai attitude towards that would be, well, the further back you go, the more Kedusha there was. In our own terms, think of your grandparents, right? And who was holier than my own grandmother? I'm sure grandmothers were great, don't get me wrong, but mine was a tzedekah. This is something special. My mother's a tzedekah too. My aunts and uncles are all very precious and very special, but my grandmother filled this spiritual nature that just, they don't make women like they used to. So progressively going from that generation to 1 or 2 or 3 later, look into your own family and your own family tree, your own genealogy, and you'll see that spirituality isn't exactly growing on trees today. It's a lot harder for us to reach these levels that people used to reach without, seemingly to us anyway, without much effort. I remember a guy I went to a yeshiva with when I was in Mitzpeh Richo. His father's family was from Dubdub, the city of Kohanim in Morocco. It was funny, I mentioned before Kohanim proving their genealogy. So he actually has a Megillat Yichus. He has a scroll of parchment that was stitched into a sidur in which his ancestry is traced all the way back to Ezra al-Sofer, who himself was a Kohen. So they walk, as the family kept this in the family, and then they wrote on parchment everyone, the name, the father's name, the son's name, and what his occupation was, and what his residence, his location. So David ben Ezra HaKohen, who was a Sofer, lived in Meknes. This one was going back all the way to Ezra Sofer. Anyway, his father told me that he remembered when he was younger walking into the houses of his aunts when he was younger. The husbands were out working during the day. No work from home options in Morocco 50, 60 years ago. And he said he remembered walking into the houses of some of his aunts as an energetic young child looking for cookies. And he said that he didn't understand why at the time, but many of his aunts, when he would come in, would basically, in pantomime, show him where the cookies are. So he'd walk into the house and, oh, okay, like what you're looking for, there's a jar on top of the thing right next to the kitchen. So he would go eat his cookies and he would leave. Thank you, Chazak, make a bracha. Okay, and he goes. And he found out later on when he grew up that there's such a thing as a Tani Dibur. What's a Tani Dibur? It's a fast in which you don't refrain necessarily from eating food, you refrain from speaking. And so he had relatives. Among them, they were considered relatively simple people who didn't talk for days at a time. Imagine that. And yes, Facebooking and statuses, that still counts as talking. Nothing. No communication, nothing. Just, like, why waste the words? The Rambam says you have to consider your life as if you have a certain budget of words that you can use over the course of your lifetime. David Saraf is laughing. Why? Because today we just borrow more words and print them like the government does with money. No, it doesn't work that way with words. There are only so many words you can say before you die. And use them wisely, use them cautiously, use them carefully. There was no Federal Reserve Bank at the time. Because each one of these words brings you closer to death. That's a very powerful perspective. So you had people who lived with this emunah. In our generation, go try to sell that to someone. Good luck. Let's start a Facebook group. I promise I'm not talking today from like 9 to 9:30. Let's try. Don't even go 24 hours. Let's try a half hour without talking. We'd go nuts. We'd go crazy.
Very small tangent, but I learned this saying from the Rambam, and I was on a plane to Israel, and I watched this movie with Eddie Murphy called 1,000 Words. It's this exact same teaching. And there's a tree that has the number of leaves of words that he can say, and more words that he says.
He
plucks leaves off the tree, and then he dies.
Yeah, well, it's a very powerful concept. I think the Rambam coined the phrase. It goes back 900 years, 1,500 years. So, okay, in our generation, spirituality is for some reason much more difficult for us to perceive, to live, to embody, to personify, and to pass on. Another cute joke to tell about this: these two elderly Jews who pray together their entire lives. One day, one of them goes away from vacation, and he comes back after a couple of months. He sees the other guy, who's now in his 60s. He says, "No, guy grew peot." He says to him, "Well, you became a Hasid, a Breslev." The guy says to him, "No." He said, "But I've been doing some thinking, and I decided that I'm going to grow out my peot up to here, so that my son's peot should be at least up to here, and that way my grandkids won't shave them off altogether." You know? I realized that the chances are it's going to be hard for me to pass this on, so I have to extend a little bit, go beyond what's required, and hope they should keep the basic bare minimum of halacha. So yes, it's a little bit depressing, and you think about it this way: for us to reach our grandparents, let alone their grandparents, and the generations of antiquity, would be almost practically impossible. At the same time, not to despair, at least not yet. The merits of our generation, which lives in such spiritual darkness, the information superhighway, but we're blinded by information that means nothing, and we kind of lose the perspective, we lose the importance, the right list of priorities, so to speak, in life. Because we have much greater challenges, because we have so many more distractions, and so many more challenges, obstacles, pitfalls, internet presents all that, and then some, our accomplishments are that much more meaningful. That you can't take away from us. No one's going to tell me today that putting on tefillin is as easy as it was 50, 100, 500 years ago. No one can make the argument that it's easier today to keep Shabbat than it was 1,000 years ago. Here's a simple explanation of the argument. My great-great-grandparents didn't have cell phones. They didn't have computers. For them to not do all that much as far as productive work, literally it meant like not sewing, not lighting fires, not writing anything. Okay.
Well, they didn't have electricity.
So, electricity presents a lot more temptations for us, a lot more challenges.
But Parnasah was much more difficult at the time. Like, wasting one day of work was much more difficult than today.
Okay, you could make the case that it was an agrarian society for the most part, so your food is more local. Meaning, it's one thing if you work in computer programming and you missed a week of work and you don't have benefits, you don't have unemployment insurance, so you missed a week of work, you have to find a way to find money to make food. If, for the most part, people were growing the food they were eating, then at least you could take care of this. You had a source of water and you had grains, you could plant them and somehow figure things out. Today it's much more difficult because we're so removed from all these processes that you need a constant cash flow because we pay everyone to do everything for us. You don't want to buy grains and grind them into flour and sift them and then bake the bread. You pay the guy who produces the guy who grows the grains, the guy who grinds them, the guy who delivers them, the guy who bakes it, the guy who packages it. So life today is more expensive, but it's because we live a more luxurious lifestyle that we're not working as hard. We're working harder in one particular professional concept, one particular field, not so much in the rest. So my question to you is like this. Is there necessarily more or less Kedusha in our times present among those who, despite all of the challenges, despite our distance from antiquity, despite all of the temptations and the obstacles, someone in our generation who keeps mitzvot is holier or less holy than those of antiquity?
Argument
A fair
of
question?
It's the argument of Nach.
To an extent, yeah. He was a prophet, he had some help, but yeah, that's... God was talking to me, a different story. And the Kuzari makes this point. The Kuzari says, it's amazing. Chaim killed his brother and God still talks to him. I can't get him to like my status on Facebook and I put on tefillin every day. Something, throw me a bone, you know? So he says, we were talking about people with tremendous neshamot, people who have tremendous spiritual potential, and apparently even this murder was something very calculated and meditated and thought out, and he thought it was the right thing to do. Okay, it's not the same thing as somebody who wants to steal somebody's watch and shoots it. But in the sense that Noah lived in a difficult generation, so he was considered a tzaddik relative to his generation, yes. It was an especially corrupt generation, there was nobody else worth saving, so his case was a little bit extreme. But that's the question. Is there more kedusha associated with someone who keeps basic mitzvot, or even goes beyond the letter of the law, the mehadrin, the people who fancify, embellish, and beautify their mitzvot? Is there more kedusha associated with somebody who was doing that when everyone was keeping the mitzvot, regardless of how much anti-Semitism there was or wasn't? Or is there more kedusha associated with somebody today who, despite all the struggles and the temptations to lose your identity, the melting pot concept, just be American or French or whatever, or Israeli, I guess works the same way, and forget the traditions, forget the mitzvot, forget Torah shebichtav, Torah shebe'al peh. In order for kedusha to be expressed in our generation, perhaps it needs to be so much more intense, so much more powerful, so much more convincing, that the merit, the zechut, awarded to those who keep the mitzvot is perhaps even greater than it was in antiquity among people who perhaps did more. Even though to us it seems like they were doing what comes naturally, it was like kedusha, it grew on trees, everybody had Ruach HaKodesh, but still, if they went further, their challenges and obstacles were much less. So here's an anecdote, because everybody likes a good story. The Arizal, once in one of these discussions, had Rav Chaim Vital, and boy, what I would have loved to be a fly on the wall when they had these discussions. He writes in Sha'ar Ruach HaKodesh, of the 8, he wrote more than 8 books, but let's say 13 or 14. The 8 major works in succession are all cataloged as what they call, they're all sha'arim, they're all written as like gates, so to speak, or entryways. You have Sha'ar HaMitzvot, Sha'ar HaKavanot, Sha'ar HaPesukim, Sha'ar HaMa'amar HaRashbi. So each one of these books focuses on Pesukim and Tanakh and understanding the metaphysical, the I would say Kabbalistic, but people have crazy associations with that. The deeper metaphysical concepts behind Pesukim in the Torah, or behind paragraphs in the Zohar, behind the mitzvot. Sha'ar HaKavanot talks more about tefillah, what we should be focusing on, meditating on during the tefillah, names of Hashem, permutations, combinations, etc. Sha'ar Ruach HaKodesh is an entire book written on the topic of Ruach HaKodesh, how it's achieved, what influences are detrimental to it, what influences are positive and constructive towards it, etc. So Rav Chaim Vital asked the Arizal, how is it possible that you've achieved all that you've achieved? Some pretty amazing things. And all of this that we have recorded is over the course of, b'sach hakol, 14 months, during which he taught, after which he passed away. He was, I think, 38 and a half or 39. So he said to him, you should know, forget what I've accomplished. He said, if I were alive in the generation of the Tanaim and the Amoraim, I would have surpassed them all. Not out of ga'awah, not out of pride, like I'm bigger, better, stronger, faster, smarter, etc. He said, the question is not, how is it possible that I achieved what it is that I achieved? It's like, how is it possible to achieve anything? Given the challenges that we have in our, imagine this, 500 years ago, and he's like, man, spirituality today is almost impossible. Because the women, instead of covering up to here, they cover up to here. Welcome to New York in 5774. I'll let you all draw your own conclusions. New York or LA?
LA more than New York.
between a rock and a hard place, right? So he makes this comment, and the comment is, it almost implies that the majority of his work went into focusing on neutralizing negative influences, neutralizing temptations, neutralizing distractions, and concentrating on getting done what else he could when that energy had already been spent. And so he says, if I didn't have to waste so much of my time, or let's say spend so much of my time focusing on purification and cleanliness as opposed to actually productive work and moving things without these hindrances, without these restrictions and limitations, I would have achieved infinitely more. Like this. So these books aren't published for mass consumption, obviously. There's a reason why they're not out there on the internet. They are, but not in a way that's easy to understand. So the point that he's making is that it's not so much that it's impressive that he achieved what he did, it's the timing, the generation, the context in which this happened that makes it that much more impressive. You follow this point?
I get something though, but I feel like if you think about that, then that's why the ultra-Orthodox add even more things. For example, they look down, they won't look at a woman so that they don't have that temptation, they don't have that thoughts, those type of thoughts. But don't you think that then these type of thoughts lead to extremism, and that's not good either?
Yes, there's a whole discussion to be had on that topic. My argument diffuses the discussion much more easily. And that's that I don't even think it actually accomplishes the goal.
You don't think so?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Let me give you an example. There was a guy that I knew in yeshiva who was he was really into Breslev and into happy, jumping, clapping, dancing all the time. He was the most depressing guy I have ever met in my life.
He was depressing?
Lovely guy, but depressing as a plague. It was contaminating. It's contagious. You could just be. So because he's always focusing on simcha, when I was 5 years old, I would have said, "Oh, that's great." They're like a clown, he's always doing. He's got these routines, things that he does, trying to cheer himself up and cheer people up around him. When you think about it, someone who's always focusing on his simcha is probably missing an awful lot of simcha. And if you need to make these superhuman efforts just to keep a smile on your face, there's probably more than one thing wrong with your attitude and your, where you're standing in life. Another example, maybe a little bit more tangible for many of us, is that people who have trouble waking up in the morning, it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
My challenge.
I think it's everyone's challenge in this generation. Some of us have kids. It's not a challenge, but when you're challenged to wake up at a certain hour in the morning, the challenge probably runs much deeper than that. And so you can constantly fight I have to wake up. I need an alarm. I need 2 alarms. I need louder alarms. I have to put the alarm on the other side of the room. I have to stop keeping baseballs and rocks next to the window because I just throw them at the alarm and I fall back asleep. The timing, waking up in the morning is not the problem. Maybe it's motivation. Maybe it's as motivation versus depression. Maybe it's what you're doing at night. Maybe it's what you're thinking. Maybe it's how much you're thinking about it. Maybe it's how you deal with different pressures that keep you up or keep you from sleeping or that keep you distracted and divert your attention. So you have to decompress and downtime, and so you're YouTube, Facebook, whatever, till 3 in the morning. I'm just, putting that out there. If you need to focus exceptionally hard on something in order to accomplish it, it's probably because there's a tremendous weakness there. So, I don't know, spiritually, psychologically speaking, that it's advisable to even focus so much on it. It's an interesting topic for discussion.
But isn't there a concept like that? Guarding your eyes?
Absolutely. I'm 100% for it. Don't get me wrong. We should all do more of it. Yeah.
You look very religious. So I figured you might.
All day on the outside, Maria. Only on the outside.
All the parties inside.
Yeah, exactly.
792.
I have another Facebook profile. So, it's hysterical. Just I can tell where my students are holding based on who hides or reveals certain things. Like sometimes your friends are unfriended from somebody. It's like, I wonder what the guy's up to. So, yes, you have to focus on the Kedusha. It's important. Let me give you maybe an easier example of this, and this is also right out of LA. Obsessive compulsive disorder. someone who's constantly scrubbing their hands, for example. I've met people like this. It's a curse. It makes life very difficult. Someone who's constantly scrubbing his or her hands. So I hate to, huh?
Lady Macbeth, she said.
Oh, Lady Macbeth. Yeah, well, Lady Macbeth in about half of New York City. Someone who's constantly scrubbing their hands, you don't need me to tell you that cleanliness is not the problem, right? Because people have lived for thousands of years, depending on what you do for a living. I wash my hands a few times a day, but totally different reasons.
Yeah, but the subway, the germs.
We're all supportive. Anything you want to share with us, you should know. We're just here to help. So, hand sanitizer, certain circumstances, yes, I understand. I can just tell you as someone who spends an awful lot of time in slaughterhouses, like that, life goes on. It's okay. You don't have to eat things off the floor, but things happen. Again, kids are a great educational tool when it comes to things like that. People who are obsessive compulsive about cleanliness in their apartments just either haven't had kids or don't have enough. I'm not even going to look in David Saraf's direction, but you have kids, things don't stay clean very long. You can spend an awful lot of time cleaning them. You're just hanging yourself off a really high tree because you're going to get really frustrated when it gets dirty again. So you just get used to a certain standard that, no one died yet from the house being a little bit less organized than it used to be when we were single. I don't know how organized my house was when I was single, but and then life goes on. You change diapers, kids throw up, and it's okay, and you get used to it. So okay, everybody's got their threshold and their tolerance. I understand, but then it's clearly pathological when you wash your hands 50 times a day. Let's just throw out the number. Unless you work in the MTA. Okay, fine, you're the subway. So there comes a limit where you focus on something so much, and it's clearly that's not the problem. That's covering up the problem. It's symptomatic behavior. You're just reflecting something missing, like this. There's an urge that you need to satisfy, if that's the case. Look, I went to college with a girl. She wasn't from California. She used to wash her hands so often that they were just bleeding all the time. Like they were dry and bleeding. It was terrible. And I remember when I was in the cafeteria one day, so the Orthodox students would kind of sit together in the NYU cafeteria, and she would just leave the tray next to mine or someone else's and move on. So in the beginning I was like, okay, I know it's nice and gallant of me to throw your stuff out in the garbage, but still, really? And then I found out that she had this problem, and she was usually wearing gloves, and she couldn't come. Every time she walked past the garbage, she would wash her hands, and they would bleed, and she'd have to put on cream, she'd have to, mop up. That was a terrible thing. So there's clearly something else going on, is what I'm getting at. To go back to this topic of Kedusha and Shemirat HaEinayim, it's yeah. If you focus so much on something, it's first of all to the exclusion of other things, and second of all, it's generally not necessarily the issue or the problem. But yes, it's true that you can't let things go entirely, and you also can't super focus on them because it usually has like a boomerang effect, that it sort of creates the opposites. The extremism that you're referring to, I would just as soon say it's just spiritually detrimental to do too much of it. Like you focus on it too much and you create problems in the process, and put it that way. Yeah. Not that I'm suggesting we shouldn't be careful, but yeah. So is there more Kedusha the more time goes on? Or I wasn't going to say anything. You work in fashion.
Zoom to see the other Facebook account remember. Zoom to see that.
My hair down to here. Yeah. So where is there more Kedusha present? The Beit Shammai perspective would basically dictate, well, the further back you go, the closer we are to the initial, the beginnings, the creation of the world's created, effectively perfect. I mean, not missing anything, not lacking anything. Anything missing or lacking or wrong or corrupt or crooked or broken is our fault. And the more we got involved in the world, the more complications we created, and the less intense the spiritual volume became. It's hard to argue with that. Except when you take into account that if we manage to do something successfully anywhere in the spiritual domain, it actually reflects an even greater appetite for spirituality, more focus, more conviction, more devotion, more dedication. Waking up today for tefillah, you're a superstar. No joke, we try to do this every morning. We have to call people. You can get up and motivate yourself to do something, to do any mitzvah. Eating kosher, Shabbat, kosher, you name it. It's so much harder to do, even if it's because of our corruption and our weakness and our temptations. It reflects a greater degree of kedusha in a certain perspective than maybe it used to. Not that hard to understand. Someone who grew up in Yemen and kept Shabbat, when everybody around them was keeping Shabbat, it just wasn't all that hard. It might have been hard. As a matter of fact, stand up and say, I don't believe in this, I'm not going to do it anymore. If you grew up in a society where very few people keep Shabbat, you're the outsider, the only woman covering her hair, the only woman wearing skirts, the only guy who leaves early for Shabbat at work, etc. These are really tough challenges. These are really difficult things. You're going to stick out. You're going to be different. And I know society tells you that they accept everybody, love everybody, multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilingual, it's nonsense. People love what's similar to them. People don't like what's different from them. So if they got over the skin color difference thing, they didn't go to anything else because they're still very judgmental. So for me to get up and leave work early, and other people are going to accuse me of being lazy or slacking off or expecting entitlements and rights other people don't have, so I can make it up. I can work on Sunday. I'll come in on the non-Jewish holidays, but it means sticking out. And when every Jew did this, it wasn't all that hard to do. It was difficult, but not as difficult. When I'm the only one, when there are Jews who work on my floor or in my business or in my industry who don't keep Shabbat, it's even more difficult for me to make the case, hey, I deserve a break. What do you mean? That guy in accounting and that woman in marketing are both Jewish, and they're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How do you explain? Well, yeah, but they're not so observant. I am. It becomes much more difficult. So, Hanukkah is basically the holiday on the Jewish calendar, the only holiday on the Jewish calendar that focuses exclusively on the topic of assimilation. We'll talk about this more a little bit next week. It's ironic how the least affiliated Jews on the planet, even people who for generations aren't even Jewish anymore, Jewish ancestry somewhere, they'll keep on lighting the menorah. It's like the one mitzvah they do. May not fast on Yom Kippur, they might not keep Shabbat, they might not eat kosher, may not be Jewish or have married Jewish, and they'll still light the menorah.
Is that true?
Bizarrely enough.
In the United Kingdom, I know that's very much the case in America, partly because of the association with Christmas, but is that the same?
I don't think anybody lights the Hanukkah on Christmas. I mean, I think... I don't think anybody lights the menorah on Christmas. I think...
No, I'm just saying because of it's the holiday time and... it's what the Jews can have.
It's Christmas.
There you go. So I'm just asking if that is also the case with regard to Europe, if that's still one of the last bastions of religiosity.
Hard to say when it comes to Europe because I don't know how many intact communities are left there. Save for France, England to a certain extent, there isn't really much left anywhere else. I don't know. In this last generation, after really everything's pretty much emptied out, I don't know to tell you how many Jews observe. I can tell you for sure that in Israel, in America, Canada, it's a very easy. Look, it's easy, it's fun, it doesn't cost much. I mean, for a lot of reasons, you could say it's not one of those difficult mitzvot to keep that really makes you stick out. Not especially offensive to anybody. Maybe the Greeks, but who cares? Their economy collapsed. So, ironically, after 2,000 years. So. It's an interesting relationship that the Chag has with it. But the one point that I did want to make kind of emphatically is that you can look at this through Beit Hillel's view, and really halakha we hold like them. Halakha we tend after Beit Hillel, even if Beit Shammai represents maybe a higher level of doing things or a more heavenly perspective on things. At the end of the day, as people, these are the halachot that are applicable to us, says the Gemara, until the time of Mashiach. When we adopt the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we start looking at things through the right goggles, we'll have perhaps a better appreciation of how things are ideally supposed to be. And so yes, even if the challenges, the difficulties, Yetzer Hara, it's all my fault. It's me and my bad habits and my bad routines and my detrimental social circle and whatever. Some Facebook friends I probably should have deleted a long time ago. Even if I create my own beasts, I create my own challenges, it still says a lot. It still says a lot more in this generation when you're able to perform your mitzvot, when you're able to, refrain from doing avirot, despite all the temptations that are around. So Beit Hillel's approach is that we are answered. So this is effectively we hold halakha like Beit Hillel, where ultimately we are adding more kedusha. In their time, the fact that we didn't lose our identity, that we keep on pushing, that we pressed, which is actually a little renaissance in Jewish thought. This is effectively the time during which the Mishnah is being redacted. The Gemara starts a few centuries after the destruction of Beit HaMikdash, but this is when there was actually an explosion in Jewish identity, in that we started committing Torah Shebe'al Peh to writing, which technically wasn't so ideal, but the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Halakha that we have from this time period are basically what kept us alive to this day. So it wasn't just that Hanukkah represents another near catastrophe that was averted. It's actually that we got a boost from it. We managed to do something so tremendous and so special that it left an impression going forward. We commemorate this day because we proactively took back our identity and realized that despite the challenge, the enticing culture of assimilation that was around us, we woke up, got ourselves together, and put it together. Another last note I'll make on this is in the name of Rabbi Ashkenazi. He used to say that of all the similarities between Hanukkah and Purim, there's a very big difference between them. And this, the Gemara says in Masechet Megillah, we used to have Sefer HaShmonaim. We used to have effectively, it's almost like a Megillah, written during the time of the Hashmonaim, the time of the revolution, the rebellion of Hanukkah. And this book, Chazal came to the conclusion that it was apocryphal in English, meaning that it wasn't canonized, it wasn't made part of the Tanakh. We have 24 books in the Tanakh. We don't have this 25th that was debated and let go. One reason for this is that it wasn't written with any degree of Ruach HaKodesh. We don't have any indication that it was written, divine inspiration, that there was a divinely inspired message for the future. Technically, it was a victory and that we need to pass this on, and we do, but not in the form of scripture, not in the form of a Sefer or a Megillah like we have with Esther. So Rav Ashkenazi said the difference between Purim and Hanukkah is that the story of Purim, if it was them physically trying to kill us, just trying to annihilate us, kill all the Jews in the world, regardless of observant, not observant, they didn't care, they didn't distinguish. Like the Germans many years later. So that story was written, it happened, it came to a conclusion, and we celebrate its conclusion. We celebrate the fact that they weren't able to kill us, they weren't able to do it, and that no future generation will be able to do it, no matter how hard they try. The story of Hanukkah, he used to say, the book was not admitted into the Tanakh because the story hasn't been finished, hasn't been written. The physical challenge of let's kill all the Jews and then it gets turned on its head at the last minute, that physical threat was thwarted. The physical threat, the spiritual threat of assimilation, of losing our identity, of capitulating to the pressures of the different societies around us, that's still very much alive today. In other words, the end of that story hasn't been written. It's up to us to pass the torch on, so to speak. It's up to us to every generation has to take conscious awareness of where it holds, where it stands, and how close or far they are from assimilating into the cultures around them. And that chapter is the one that we're still in the process of writing. In other words, the book hasn't been completed. That's why it wasn't admitted into the Tanakh. Fascinating thought. We'll take it up more a little bit next week. Take a quick couple minutes to snack, and then we'll go on.
Imagine we switch. We put the tzaddikim from the past now, and we go in the past. I'm sure we won't be able to do it like that. And I'm sure they will. And today, I'm sure they will do a
It's a question that really can't. It's a question that can't.
I think that the challenges of today, Hashem put them for us to be able to achieve something, because we would not be able to achieve that level of.
It's a tempting thought. I have to contest it because look, take for example the story of David HaMelech, right? David and Bathsheba. So Gemara says no. David and Bathsheba, what happened there was he got punished. At the end of the day, he got punished. So it must have been he did something wrong. And the Gemara is an expression of the Gemara, an opinion that says, Kol ha'omer David hata ino ela to'eh. One who accuses David of having sinned is nothing but mistaken. You're wrong. Like you have the story wrong. So Sabbat wants to explain this to us. He says, look, He got punished. Natan Navi comes to him and tells him, that's it, you're going to be punished. This disaster in your family is going to happen, etc. You lost a child. So he had a difficult life afterwards. His explanation of the Gemara is like this. If you believe David did what L'havdil Elef Alfei Abdalot, our modern day politicians do for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, then you're comparing him to people who are infinitely inferior to him, and people who did not live life as intensely as he did. Along with this intensity comes tremendous temptation and tremendous challenges. Right? Let me give you another example of this, because it's the same thing. The Gemara says, the challenges of being rich are greater than the challenges of being poor. How do you understand that? Someone who's rich is judged more harshly and more severely, has more to account for, more to be accountable for, has more to abuse. That's really the key point. You have more at your disposal when you're wealthy than when you're not. Simply put, someone who's poor has no choice. I can work and eat, or I cannot work, and the government will print money and give me welfare. But it's not the same. I can't choose to do whatever I want. There are fantasies that I can't fulfill when I don't have money. Like, I'm not going to go to Atlantic City and drink 3 kegs of top shelf whiskey and gamble $1 million in one night. I don't have those options available to me, so it's not even that tempting to me to sit there and dream about, I only wish I go to Atlantic City and waste all the money that I work so hard to earn. Someone who's wealthy, on the other hand, can afford, him or herself, a lot more of these luxurious forms of Yetzer Hara, like drugs and alcohol and vacations and gambling and binge spending and purchases that are just ridiculous and absurd. The temptations are greater because you have much more by way of ability, capacity. You're able to do much more. In nishmatic terms, no one alive today could ever be or will ever be as attracted to a potential nishmatic soulmate like David HaMelech. No offense to any of the men or women in the room, but the way your average man or woman today feels about making a connection with another neshama is 1/1,000,000th of what David HaMelech experienced when he first saw Bathsheba. Not saying it wasn't a mistake, it just wasn't a mistake of the proportions that you and I are capable of making. The attraction was so intense, not physical attraction, she's really cute, I'll friend her on Facebook. This is like his entire neshama is drawn with an electromagnet. And it was a much different challenge than one that we would have today. So here, the Gemara says, for example, Bathsheba was destined to David HaMelech from the 7 days of the creation of the world. Like, this is the other half of his neshama. Why? She was married to somebody else in the meantime. It's a tremendous lesson for those of us who aren't yet married, that it's entirely possible that for whatever reason, the neshama that I'm going to marry is currently or was previously married. That's okay. Not the end of the world. Hashem has his reasons. But something Kedai is worth being open to. So David HaMelech knows that he has to, he knows prophetically that this is his future wife. Not like we dated, we had a nice time, she has a nice smile, and he was really generous with dinner, so let's get married, why not? His neshama knows that he has no choice, nowhere else. There's no other woman in the world who corresponds to him like she does. It's an entirely different level of connection. It's also that an appreciation, I think, something that we can't compare. Look, someone who is an expert in music is much more offended by someone who fakes it or someone who plays out of key or out of time. So someone who's so in touch with his or her neshama and understands neshamot and how they work. So you're talking about, you see a nishmatic quality. The only way I can compare this to is I guess for a man, this would be like saying, there are lots of women and they're all beautiful, but some of them maybe are more appealing to certain people than others. And then there's one that really stands out physically, right? Who has brown hair and brown eyes, because who said blonde hair and blue eyes are attractive? A Sephardi girl, dark skin, brown hair, brown eyes, the most beautiful thing in the world. It's true. the comparison in neshamot would be something similar, but we can't even appreciate this. I'm talking about it, it sounds like magic. The way you perceive, her potential, her midot, the neshamot that she's capable of bringing to Olam Hazeh as her children, that's what he's drawn to. No one else like this on the face of the entire planet. So I'm sure it stuck out much more in his mind than, some cute girl who works in the office or something. It's not the same way that we experience life. So Sabat made the point, and the Gemara says this: anyone who is greater than his or her peers, it is clear, like it's a well-known thing that their yitzarim, their temptations are greater too. So when we think of tzaddikim, it's not that they're tzaddikim because they don't do anything wrong. They're tzaddikim because they have tremendous intensity. Think absolute value of the neshama. They can be tremendous tzaddikim, tremendous rashayim. But everything by them is more intense. So Cain, the example that we quoted before, he's capable of killing and he's still capable of being a prophet. I could probably kill someone, I don't know about the prophecy. So he lives life with this unbelievable intensity that's just incomprehensible to us. And even what he did wrong is not comparable to our mistakes. Yes, he did something terrible. He got punished for it. If he got punished, it was because it was wrong. And he knew it was wrong, and he did it anyway. In fact, Hashem warns him not to do it, and he does it anyhow. But the intensity with which these people live, the way they experience life, is on a different planet. And that's the difference. So, tzaddikim in previous generations, it's impossible to say they would do more or they would do less if they were alive today. Because if someone with a tremendous neshama were alive in our generation, I'm pretty much assuming there aren't that many of them, someone with tremendous neshama were alive in our generation, they would either freak out and explode if they saw everything that was going on around them, like they would have an allergy, a physical, spiritual intolerance for the impurity and the corruption around them. They would just die. Probably a likely scenario. Or who knows what the temptations might cause or create. It's tempting to assume they would be perfect no matter where they are. But the Arizal said that's not true. He said, I achieved what I achieved. It's not even such a miracle. I could have done much more if I weren't alive. If I didn't live in this generation, I could have done a lot more. If I were alive 500 years ago, I would have, resurrected the dead.
Did you give an answer whether it was holier, the one that does it today?
It's a dilemma without an answer to it. I mean, it's a paradox. You can always look at it in both perspectives, and both of them have truth to them. All I can tell you, let's say by way of Chazal and like maybe legitimately Jewish theology and philosophy, is that Chazal made their determinations based on Beit Hillel. So for what it's worth, either because that's what we need, or because that's closer to the objective truth, I can't answer that question. But if you tell me that we can go from one level of holiness to the next, that we can grow, that we can do more, we can achieve more, it's an awfully lot more encouraging than telling me we stink. We're terrible. We'll never get anywhere near what the previous generations did. As a matter of fact, Sabato actually told us that he hated stories about tzaddikim. Hated them with a passion. He would never tell us, I didn't grow up in this background. I will tell you a story about a Rav who looked at someone and killed him, and another one who resurrected the dead in order to make a minyan. And people who prayed in the middle of the summer in Morocco to fill a mikveh, in the desert. A story like this about some tzaddikim in Morocco, like the middle of the Sahara, the middle of the desert. They pray in the middle of the summer. There's rain. It rains just enough to fill the mikveh, and then it stops. On the one hand, it's kind of inspiring, and then you grow up and you think about it, you say, God, that's just depressing. I will never achieve anything like I can't even pay my bills on time. How? Fill a mikveh in the desert? Are you serious? I lose my cell phone every couple of weeks. What do you mean? So it's just very depressing. It's very, it brings a lot more anxiety than it does inspiration when you think about this and you say, my God, this, the Vilna Gaon knew the whole Shas when he was 7 years old. I probably couldn't spell when I was 7. My mother was still picking out my clothes. It's true. I said it in front of everyone, not on my secret Facebook account. Where does that leave me? How much does that inspire me, or how much does that encourage me to do more? It's depressing. It's depressing. Forget it, man. If you couldn't fly by the time you're a bar mitzvah, go to the recycle bin and try again next time. So if you tell me stories about someone who had struggles, someone who had challenges, someone who had difficulties, and nonetheless managed to achieve or accomplish something, that's fantastic. This I can identify with. A story about a Rav who went through a difficult period in his life where he was learning Torah, he couldn't remember, he was troubled, difficulty with the Parnassah, Shalom Bayit, I don't know. Yeah, I can identify with that. We'll have our ups and downs, and in spite of all of his challenges, he managed to get something done. That says a lot more to me than someone who was born without a Yetzer Hara, someone who, could breathe fire and see through time. I just don't, not my, Some people like that. I don't know. I can't entertain you guys by telling you stories like that because I can tell with a straight face. There are stories that are written. I mean, things that'll blow your mind. I've met people like this, but telling over the story isn't very spiritually productive or instructional. I find it depressing. I don't know, but I just... You're all mad at me. I'll stop. I'll just go home. I'm sorry. Try again next time. All right.